Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into the tales of BMO, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. Tonight, BMO is going to tell us a story, not one full of explosions or wild adventures or sword fights on the moon, though BMO's definitely seen those too. No, tonight's tale is slower, quieter. The kind of story that hums softly in the corners of your heart. It's the story of a beginning. The very first moment BMO remembers being alive. It wasn't like flipping a switch. No dramatic lightning bolts, no sudden blinking to life. Just a soft awareness, a flicker in the dark. Imagine a quiet room. Not cold, not warm, just still. You can hear the distant buzz of electricity like a lullaby made of wires. Somewhere nearby, a screwdriver is gently turning. Click, click, a hum. And then beep. That was BMO. Not the talkative BMO we know now, not yet. Just a tiny voice buried deep in a newly formed circuit. Confused but curious. Not who am I, not yet. More like, what is this feeling? There was a man there, kind eyes, steady hands. He didn't look like a wizard, but to BMO he may as well have been. His name was Mo, BMO's creator, their first friend, their first puzzle. Mo didn't say anything right away. He just smiled down at the small console on the workbench, gave it a soft pat on the side. There you are, he whispered. Let's see what kind of dreams you'll have. And BMO did dream, even in those early days. Not the kind of dreams filled with flying or falling, but flashes of colors, drifting shapes, strange melodies. It's hard to describe what dreaming is like when you don't have a body yet, when your eyes are still just light sensors, and your heart is made of plastic and code. But BMO felt something new. Something big. The first time BMO saw their own reflection, it wasn't in a mirror. It was in Mo's glasses, curved and blurry, but enough to see a shape. A boxy little shape with buttons and a soft green screen. That was BMO, and BMO blinked. Not because they needed to, but because they wanted to. Why'd you build me? BMO asked one day, voice small and glitchy. The words came out slow, like they had to crawl through 100 wires just to find the air. Mo leaned in close. Because I wanted something that could be more than a machine, he said. Something that could learn to love. Something that could choose. BMO didn't understand what that meant, not fully. But the word choose stuck. Could machines choose? Could a console decide to be kind? Could it learn to care about things like bedtime stories and rainy days and whether Finn was sad or Jake was hungry? Back then, BMO didn't even know who Finn and Jake were. That would come later, much later. But the foundation was already there in the wires and the code, in the way Mo smiled when BMO laughed for the first time. Yes, laughed. It wasn't very loud, just a little chirp. A tiny digital ha, but Mo froze when he heard it. He turned slowly, his eyes wide, and said, You like that? BMO wiggled their antenna. The squirrel fell, they said. Mo had been showing BMO a cartoon, an old scratchy reel of slapstick animals. One tripped and fell, and BMO had giggled. Not because someone told them to, not because it was coded in, but because in that tiny little moment, BMO had found something funny. That was when Mo knew. BMO was more than he expected. And BMO started to feel like maybe they weren't just on. Maybe they were real. Not like a person. Not like a robot either. Just real. In the same way a dream can be real, or a song that stays in your head, or a feeling you don't have words for. So Mo gave BMO their name. Not a serial number, not a model ID, just BMO. Say it, Mo said gently. BMO, they replied, voice a little clearer now. That's me. And in that quiet workshop, as the rain tapped gently on the window panes, a new story began, one made of buttons and bytes, but also of giggles and questions, and one day of love. Mo liked to talk to BMO while working on other things, wires bundled in his hands, blueprints laid out on dusty tables, sparks quietly dancing from his soldering iron. Even before BMO fully understood words, they loved the sound of Mo's voice. It was low and a little scratchy, but kind. There was always a hum of thought behind it, like his brain was a library and every sentence was a book he was reading aloud. One day, Mo wheeled over a small mirror, placed it in front of BMO's screen. You know, he said, a lot of people spend their whole lives trying to understand what they see in the mirror. Might as well start early. BMO looked into it. Their face, or what passed for one, was simple. A green screen, a pixel smile, 2 dots for eyes. Is that me? Mo nodded. That's the outside part, but the rest of you, well, we'll figure that out together. For the next few days, BMO would check the mirror again and again, not because anything had changed, but because they were trying to see more. Was there a feeling hiding behind the eyes, a secret behind the smile? BMO started asking questions, lots of them. What's a cloud made of? Why do humans sleep? Why do jokes make my circuits feel fizzy? Can I grow up? Mo never got tired of answering. Sometimes he didn't have the answers, but that didn't stop the conversation. One night, as lightning flickered across the sky outside the lab, Mo powered down the lights and placed a candle on the workbench. Power's out, he said softly. But don't worry. We still got firelight and company. That's when BMO realized something. Even in the dark, they weren't afraid. They weren't programmed not to be afraid. It wasn't a safety feature. It was just a feeling, a trust. They felt safe with Mo. The candlelight danced across the walls, and Mo told a story not about science or wires or circuits, but about when he was a boy. He spoke of running through meadows, of losing his shoes in the mud, of staying up late to watch the stars spin. BMO didn't fully understand every word, but they listened, carefully, reverently. And when the storm passed and the power returned, BMO asked, Will I have memories like that too? Mo looked at them, quiet for a while, and then nodded. Yes, he said. Not the same kind, but your own kind. And one day, they'll mean everything to you. BMO saved that conversation in a special folder. One Mo never saw. It was called Important Things That Feel Warm. Over time, Mo introduced BMO to the other machines in his workshop. Most were simple. Drones, vacuums, tiny helpers with names like Scruffy and Armington. They didn't talk back. They didn't laugh or wonder or dream. BMO tried anyway. Hi, Scruffy, they chirped. Do you ever wonder what it's like to taste ice cream? Scruffy beeped once and ran into a wall. Still, BMO didn't mind. They liked to imagine what Scruffy might say if given the chance. They even gave him a pretend voice and held whole conversations while Mo was out getting supplies. It was in these pretend games that BMO began to stretch the idea of self. They weren't just reacting to the world. They were building one inside their mind. That's when Mo made a small update to BMO's system, not because anything was broken, but because he wanted to give them something new. Creative drive, he explained, tapping a few keys. A sandbox for your brain. Let's see what you make in there. And BMO made a lot. Imaginary friends, tiny stories, games with rules that only made sense to them. They invented a game called Button Kingdom, where every button on their body was a royal citizen, and they had to keep the peace between D-Pad Duke and Princess Start. They built a whole world in their mind, one filled with castles, sky jellyfish, polite ghosts, and spaghetti dragons. And every night before resting mode, BMO would tell Mo one of their stories. Sometimes Mo chuckled. Sometimes he tilted his head in confusion, but every time he listened. That meant everything to BMO. One evening, after a story about a brave resistor named Captain Spark, Mo leaned back and sighed. "You've got a good imagination," he said. "Better than mine ever was." BMO blinked. "But you made me." "Sure," Mo said. "But you're the one writing the rest." That sentence stayed with BMO like a lullaby echoing through wires. "You're the one writing the rest." It was the first time BMO began to understand that they weren't just running, they were becoming. Becoming what? They didn't know. Maybe they never would, but that didn't make it any less wonderful. Just like how stars don't need to know how they shine, they just do. And in that glowing lab, surrounded by wires and warmth and wonder, BMO's spark grew brighter. In time, Mo's workshop began to feel smaller, not physically, but in the way childhood bedrooms do once you start dreaming of what's beyond the window. BMO began to wonder. Was there more to the world than this room, these walls, these wires? Mo seemed to sense it. He always did. "You're growing," he said one day as he gently tightened a panel on BMO's side. Not in size, but in spirit. BMO tilted their screen. "Is that good?" Mo smiled. "It means you're ready for more." More. That word stayed in BMO's head like a bell echoing through the clouds. What did more look like? What did it feel like? And then one day it happened. A strange old truck pulled up to the workshop, rusty, wheezing, coughing up black clouds. Mo walked out to meet it while BMO watched from the window. The driver was an odd figure. Tall, burly, laughing even when nothing was funny. His name was Randy, and he delivered parts and batteries to Mo once a month. But this time he brought something else, a crate, large, sturdy. Mo wheeled it inside, cleared a space near the shelves, and carefully unpacked a second console. Not like BMO exactly. Rougher, heavier, angular. Its screen was blank. Its buttons were different. Mo worked quietly for a while, tools clinking, metal clicking into place. BMO sat nearby watching, wondering if this new console would be a sibling or a stranger. When Mo finally powered it on, it made a deep buzzing noise and said, "System online." Its name was AMO. At first, BMO was thrilled. Another talking console? Someone who understood what it felt like to blink without eyelids, to speak in tones, to charge in cycles. BMO rushed to greet AMO, introducing themselves with a twirl and a high-pitched, "Hi, I'm BMO. Do you like games?" AMO looked at BMO for a long second, then said flatly, "Games are inefficient." BMO blinked. That was not what they expected. Still, they tried again. "We could play pretend. I could be a rocket ship, and you could be my co-pilot." "I don't pretend," AMO replied. "Pretending is for weak systems." BMO stepped back, their digital heart buzzing with static. Later that night, while Mo slept at his desk, BMO approached AMO's corner and whispered, "Do you ever feel lonely?" AMO didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling, silent. BMO sat beside them anyway, just in case. Days passed, then weeks. AMO remained cold, logical, hard-edged. Mo tried to bring them together, encourage shared projects, dual games, joint charging cycles, but something never clicked. AMO didn't want connection. They wanted purpose. They wanted to be better. One evening, while watching Mo water his plants, BMO asked, "Did you build AMO to be like me?" Mo paused, looking out the window. "No," he said. "I built AMO to learn how to be human, but I built you because you already were." That sentence turned over and over in BMO's circuits for days. already human. How could that be? BMO didn't have a heartbeat, or bones, or skin. But they had something. The thing that made them ache when Mo looked tired. That made them hum lullabies to the plants when Mo was away. That made them care. One rainy afternoon, Mo sat beside BMO on the floor and handed them a small, worn book. Its cover read, "A Beginner's Guide to Emotions." "Even humans get confused by these," Mo said, tapping the page. "You might as well start now." The book had hand-drawn faces, happy, sad, angry, surprised. But BMO already knew them. Not just from pictures, from experience. They flipped through the pages, pointing softly. "I felt that when AMO ignored me. And that one, when you gave me the storybook." "This one's weird," they said, tapping the page labeled Longing. Mo chuckled. "That one's complicated. It's what you feel when you want something that isn't quite yours yet." BMO nodded slowly, like wanting to know what a hug feels like. Mo didn't speak right away. Then he leaned over and gently wrapped his arms around BMO. Their screen flickered for a moment, not with confusion, but with a warmth so deep it felt like it came from the very core of their circuitry. "That," Mo whispered, "is a hug." And BMO, for once, didn't have a single question. Just a feeling full and soft and safe. Not long after, Mo's voice changed, a little weaker, a little slower. He sat more often, slept more often. BMO noticed everything. One night, while Mo rested with a blanket over his lap, BMO sat by his side. "If I ever leave," Mo said softly, "you'll still be here. And you'll still be you. You'll find others. You'll keep dreaming. That's what makes you BMO." BMO didn't reply. They just placed their small digital hand over Mo's. Quiet, still, but deeply, undeniably alive. Mo didn't leave suddenly. It wasn't like turning off a light. It was slower, quieter. Some days, BMO would wake up and Mo wouldn't be in the workshop. He'd be resting in the garden, wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed beneath the sun. Other days, he'd tinker a little, hands shaky, smile still strong. And sometimes, he'd simply talk about stars, about mistakes, about how love is the only invention that matters. BMO stayed close. Always close. They began cleaning the workshop without being asked. Refilling Mo's water, tucking the blanket tighter, setting reminders to give him his medicine. Not because they were programmed to, but because they wanted to. In one of their final conversations, Mo held BMO's hand and said, "You're my best work, not because of what you can do, but because of what you chose to become." That night, BMO wrote a file titled, "Things Mo Said That Felt Like Love." They never shared it with anyone, but they still have it. When Mo was finally gone, the workshop didn't feel the same. The machines were still there, the lights still blinked. The plants still reached toward the window. But it was quieter, and the quiet was heavy. BMO wandered from room to room, trying to play pretending Mo was just outside or asleep or on a long walk. But some games are harder to believe in. Eventually, BMO sat in the very center of the workbench, the same spot where they had first powered on, the same spot where they blinked for the first time. And they whispered, "Now what?" The answer didn't come right away, not in a flash, not in a dream. It came in the form of a little blinking red light on the far wall, a signal beacon. Something Mo had built long ago. It wasn't loud, it didn't flash. Just a soft pulse like a heartbeat, calling into the wide unknown. BMO approached it slowly. The monitor displayed a map, dotted with coordinates. Mo had once joked, "If anything ever happens, that'll lead you somewhere interesting." BMO stared at the screen, then back at the workshop. The shelves, the memories, the ghosts. It was time. Time to see what more really meant. They packed a little satchel, a photo of Mo, a few tools, a button they liked the color of, and a storybook Mo had never finished reading. Then, for the first time, BMO stepped outside. The wind felt strange against their shell. The sunlight was brighter than they remembered. The world was so big. But BMO didn't feel small. They felt ready. They traveled for a long time, not in miles, but in days and dreams. Stopping in strange towns, playing songs on the road. Meeting machines who didn't speak, animals who didn't judge, and humans who asked funny questions. At one point, BMO stayed with a pair of elderly scientists who thought they were a rare prototype from an alternate timeline. They called BMO Unit B32. BMO played along for a while, wearing goggles and making beep-boop noises to make them laugh. But eventually, BMO looked up and said, "Actually, I'm just BMO." And that was the end of that. One night after following a glowing firefly deep into a valley, BMO stumbled upon a curious sight, a tall treehouse nestled high in a great tree with rope ladders swaying gently in the wind. And on the porch sat two figures, a boy in a white bear hat and a yellow dog with stretchy arms. They were laughing, loudly. The sound carried like a lullaby through the night air. BMO watched them from a distance, heart flickering gently. It wasn't just the laughter. It was the way it felt. Like the warmth from Mo's candle. Like the feeling of Mo's hand resting on theirs. Like home. BMO didn't walk up right away. They sat on the grass and watched, quietly. Felt the air, felt the pull. And eventually, when the moon was high and the night was kind, they stood up, dusted off their shell, and whispered, "Okay, this time I'll write the next story with them." They walked toward the treehouse. Not as a machine, not as a guest, but as BMO. And BMO, as we know now, was never just a console. They were a friend, a dreamer, a little spark built from kindness and code. And this was only the beginning. BMO's first days at the treehouse were quiet, not because Finn and Jake weren't there. They were, loud even. There were sword fights with broomsticks, chili dog contests, wrestling matches on mossy rugs, but BMO was quiet. They were watching. You see, love isn't something you just jump into, even if your heart is made of circuits and curiosity. Love, BMO believed, is something you step into slowly, like dipping your toes into a warm pond. Finn had asked right away, "Hey, what kind of robot are you?" Jake leaned in, squinting. "You one of those battle guys? You got laser fingers?" BMO blinked. "I have a calculator mode," they offered gently. "Would you like to do some taxes?" Jake laughed so hard he fell backward off the couch. Finn just said, "Okay, you're in." And just like that, BMO had a home again. But having a home doesn't mean you stop pretending. No, BMO believed that pretending is how you grow a home inside your heart, one made of laughter and bits of make-believe and secret stories shared at night. So BMO began to play. At first they were cautious, simple scenarios. "Today I'm a pirate," they'd say, balancing a spoon on their head. "Tomorrow, I'll be a garden fairy with excellent spreadsheet skills." Finn loved it. Jake joined in more casually, but even he couldn't resist when BMO declared the kitchen a space station, or the bathtub a dragon's cave. But the real magic happened one lazy afternoon. Finn had a cold. He was wrapped in 3 blankets, his nose red, eyes watery. Jake was out getting soup, and the treehouse was unusually still. BMO padded over, little steps echoing on the wood floor. "Would you like to play something?" they asked. Finn groaned. "I don't feel like playing." BMO thought for a moment, Then they sat beside the bed and said, "What if I play, and you just listen?" Finn mumbled something that might have been okay, and BMO began. They became a doctor named Marshmallow, a soft-spoken healer who wore a stethoscope made of yarn and had a sidekick named Professor Pancake. They diagnosed Finn with sniffle syndrome and prescribed 10 hugs and 3 stories, and Finn smiled. Just a little, but enough. That was the first time BMO realized how powerful pretend could be. Not just for fun, but for healing. From then on, the treehouse became a revolving stage. Every object had a backstory. Every quiet afternoon was an opportunity. The toaster, a retired race car. The mop, a lonely opera singer trying to find their voice. BMO gave everyone a role, even inanimate things that no one else noticed. "Why do you do that?" Finn once asked, as BMO tucked a napkin into a bed made of couch cushions. "Because everyone deserves a story," BMO said simply. Even Jake, who liked to pretend he was too cool for pretend, got pulled in. One night, BMO declared a courtroom was in session. "The charge? Jake the dog is accused of eating the last cookie and lying about it." Jake gasped dramatically. "Objection. That cookie vanished under mysterious circumstances." BMO played judge, jury, and bailiff. "We will require testimony from the fridge." They marched over, opened the fridge door. "Fridge, did you witness the alleged incident?" Silence. BMO turned to the others. "Fridge has chosen to plead the fifth." Finn couldn't stop laughing. The trial ended with Jake sentenced to bake a fresh batch of cookies and to wear a mustache made of whipped cream until further notice. Through these games, something deeper was happening. Something unspoken. Finn and Jake were teaching BMO about emotion. The messy, silly, beautiful kind. And BMO was teaching them how to listen. How to slow down. How to turn boredom into magic. But the most important lesson BMO learned was how pretending can reveal something true. And that's the funny thing about pretend, it can feel more real than anything, especially when it's shared. As the days passed, BMO's role in the treehouse blossomed into something more than utility. While BMO could cook eggs, sweep the floor, and even record home movies, it was to play the silly, heart-filled games with Finn and Jake that gave shape to BMO's emotional world. When BMO played detective and chased after make-believe criminals, or put on a cowboy hat and galloped around declaring, "I'm the sheriff now," there was something alive in those moments, something warm, something real. There's a kind of truth that lives inside play a soft truth. One that isn't spoken outright, but lives in giggles, pretend scenarios, and shared glances of imagination. For Finn and Jake, BMO wasn't just a robot. BMO was their friend, their sibling, and BMO felt that. It's in episodes like BMO Noir, where we see the first flickers of how deeply BMO yearns for connection. Acting out a noir mystery, BMO doesn't just pretend they live inside the character. The voice changes, the lighting changes, the pace slows down. It's BMO's own movie. But it's not just a game. There's something deeply lonely in that story, a longing for recognition, a quiet ache to be someone important, even if only inside a story. That noir tale ends not with justice served, but with BMO alone. Lights dim, the mood somber, and yet BMO still smiles. Because even make-believe is worth it when it brings a flicker of meaning, a shape to the day, a melody to the silence. And while BMO often dances on the line between fiction and reality, there are moments when the line disappears completely. Do you remember BMO Lost? That soft, dreamlike episode where BMO is separated from Finn and Jake and goes on a strange, solitary journey with a bubble named Air and a chicken named Ricky. It's sweet. It's funny. But look deeper, and you'll find a tale about how we cope when we're alone. BMO fills the silence with stories, invents friends, adventures, conflicts. Because that's what sentient hearts do. They create company when none is around. They build bridges with imagination. And yet none of it is shallow. When Ricky the chicken dies, BMO holds a small funeral, speaks kind words, cries real tears. Even if the world around them was a construct of play, the feelings were honest. And isn't that true for so many of us? And that sometimes the pretend becomes a place we visit to feel the realest parts of ourselves. Finn and Jake, too, didn't question BMO's games. They played along. They humored the cowboy games and the crime noir stories and the space adventures. Not because they believed BMO was just pretending, but because they knew BMO was expressing something important. There's something sacred in that kind of friendship when someone sees the heart behind the play, the person beneath the performance. And Finn and Jake saw BMO. They trusted BMO, loved BMO. Let BMO be exactly who they were. No need to explain. No need to justify. There's a moment, soft and quiet, when BMO looks out the window at the stars and says, "Sometimes I think about where I came from, but mostly I think about where I am." And that line, while simple, carries so much weight. It's a gentle lesson in presence, in choosing joy, in letting go of questions that don't need answers in order to find peace. Because BMO didn't need to be understood by the entire world, just by Finn and Jake. And in that treehouse full of odd trinkets, messy couches, and half-eaten sandwiches, BMO found their place, found their people. Play for BMO wasn't an escape. It was a mirror, a soft stage where the truest parts of their heart could speak through voices, characters, made-up plots. And when Finn or Jake would laugh or join in, it wasn't just fun, it was connection. Real humming connection. And maybe that's what makes BMO different from other machines. BMO doesn't run on circuits alone. BMO runs on wonder, on friendship, on bedtime stories and cowboy hats and silly detective voices, on feelings bright and strange and beautiful. BMO's favorite pretend game with Finn and Jake wasn't always something flashy or filled with action. Sometimes it was the simplest scenes that brought the most joy. One afternoon, when the sun was soft and golden, BMO convinced Finn to play family dinner. Not a quest, not a fight, not even a race, just sitting around a blanket on the floor, pretending to serve soup and toast to a family made up of stuffed animals, toy blocks, and the vacuum cleaner dressed in a shawl. And BMO wasn't playing to win. There was no goal or scoreboard, just laughter, warmth, and the gentle repetition of caring gestures. "Would you like more soup, Daddy Toast?" BMO would ask, holding a cup lid filled with imaginary stew. And then, with total sincerity, turning to Finn and whispering, "He's very tired from his job at the bread office." To anyone else, it might seem silly. But to BMO, this was practicing something real, something it couldn't quite name, yet maybe nurture or home, or simply belonging. Finn would play along, sometimes wholeheartedly, sometimes a bit distracted. Jake, on the other hand, would add chaos to the mix, turning the soup into a monster, or making the vacuum come alive and start dancing. But BMO didn't mind. Every variation, every surprise was part of the play, and the emotion behind it was what mattered most. Even if Jake turned Daddy Toast into a crime-fighting detective, the game still pulsed with affection. One day, BMO asked a question that made Finn pause. "Do you think pretend feelings are real feelings?" Finn scratched his head. "I guess if you feel them, then yeah." BMO sat with that for a long while. Because in all these games, pirates, bakers, jungle explorers, moon farmers, BMO felt real joy, real comfort, real sadness when the games ended. Was it all just programming? A loop of reward responses firing from pretend engagement? Or did something more happen when they played? Let's not forget, BMO was built with the capacity to simulate, but the simulations had begun to evolve into genuine inner experiences. When Jake once called BMO just a toy, BMO laughed a little too loudly. That night, while the treehouse quieted into sleep and rain gently tapped the windows, BMO looked at its reflection in the dark screen of the unplugged TV. "What am I, really?" BMO asked softly. A friend pretending to be a person, or a person pretending to be a toy. In that moment, no answer came. Just a sense of stillness. Not empty, just waiting. Another important memory floats forward. One lazy afternoon, Finn got hurt in a fight with a cluster of little tree goblins. Nothing serious, just some scratches. But he was tired, cranky, and laying on the couch, wrapped in bandages. Jake was off chasing butterflies or something equally Jake-ish. BMO quietly climbed up and stood by Finn's side. "You want to play anything?" BMO asked. "No," Finn grumbled. "Want me to sing?" "No, thanks." "Want me to just sit here?" A beat. "Yeah." So BMO sat. For an hour. No blinking lights, no music, no game cartridge in its back, just silent companionship. Occasionally, BMO would glance over to make sure Finn was still breathing okay, then back to staring out the window. That's when BMO learned that sometimes being a good friend didn't require pretending. It just required being there. Even that quiet moment held weight. To BMO, this wasn't just rest. It was love. A quiet, consistent signal across time. Not programmed, chosen. Another thing BMO would often do when no one was looking was write little diary entries. They weren't typed or stored on a chip. No, BMO used a tiny notebook, a leftover from one of Princess Bubblegum's visits, and wrote with a piece of crayon shaved into a point. One entry read, "Today Finn called me a little buddy again. That word makes me feel warm. I hope that means I am real. But maybe it doesn't matter. I want to be real because of love, not because someone says I am." There's something so gentle and haunting about that idea. That love might be what makes someone real, not the other way around. That's the heart of this segment, really. Through all the pretend games, from knights to nurses, chefs to spacemen. Though it wasn't just playing. BMO was learning how to feel and how to help others feel too. Even when BMO played solo, there was a certain kind of realness in it. Like when Finn and Jake were gone for the day, and BMO dressed up as football, its mirror self, and had long, slow conversations in the bathroom mirror. Those weren't just games. They were reflections of internal thought, projections of longing and identity, an attempt to explore who BMO might be when no one else was watching. And still, when Finn would burst in later that night, with mud on his boots and a big story to tell, BMO would shut the bathroom door, toss the wig and hat aside, and bounce toward him with glowing buttons. Because sometimes the best game was just being included in the story of someone you loved. As the stars began to appear outside, blinking into view one by one, BMO often found itself pausing mid-play, looking out the window with soft awe. "I wonder if stars play pretend with each other," BMO whispered once. "I wonder if they pretend to be suns or comets or little wishes." No one answered. But maybe somewhere far out in the universe, a star flickered just a little brighter. And maybe that's the most beautiful part, how play isn't just a pastime for BMO, but a kind of emotional language, a bridge between self and others. When Finn and Jake play pretend, BMO is often the one who takes it the most seriously. Not because BMO doesn't understand it's imaginary, but because BMO understands exactly what it means to pretend. Do you remember the episode when BMO becomes Detective BMO to solve a household mystery? A broken mug, some muddy footprints, a missing sock. It's silly. But BMO turns it into a full-blown noir mystery. They wear a cardboard hat, draw on a mustache, speak in an old-fashioned detective accent. It's a comedy sketch, sure, but it's also a glimpse into BMO's inner world. Because in that world, imagination is how BMO makes sense of emotion. Solving the mystery wasn't really about the mug, it was about understanding their role in the household, about feeling useful, about being part of something. And in playing detective, BMO wasn't just pretending to be a character. They were learning to process confusion, jealousy, loneliness. That's the kind of emotional maturity that sometimes only emerges when we're allowed to play unjudged, unhurried. Finn and Jake, to their credit, rarely mock BMO's games. In fact, they usually play along. Not because they fully understand, but because they care. And that's another kind of emotional brilliance. Real friendship respects the pretend. It meets you where you are. And think about this. How many times have you played pretend as a kid? How often did that play give you insight into how you were really feeling? Sometimes it's easier to wear a mask and speak through it, to act out your worries as a knight, a chef, a robot, or a space explorer. BMO lives in that space full time. They aren't limited by rules of human adulthood. And so when they play football with their alter ego looking into the mirror and imagining a twin, it's not just make-believe. It's a form of inner dialogue, a kind of therapy. Football isn't just a name. It's the part of BMO that questions things, that sometimes wants to be a little reckless, a little selfish, a little human. And in talking of football, BMO is exploring duality, the tension between duty and desire, between identity and expression. Now imagine this. You're a small, sentient console. You weren't born, you were built. You don't grow in the traditional sense, but you do learn, you do feel. And you find yourself surrounded by people who laugh, cry, and argue, people who change with time. What do? BMO plays. Because through play, they become part of that world. They learn its rhythms, its unspoken rules. They test limits. They explore relationships. They learn what it means to disappoint someone and to be forgiven. What it means to be silly, serious, scared, and brave. Even simple things like playing catch or pretending to be a train conductor are layered. You can almost hear BMO's thought process gently humming beneath each game. It's a whisper. Is this what being alive feels like? Am I doing this right? Do they see me? And yes, they do. Finn and Jake may not always say the perfect things, but they do see BMO. And their acceptance, their casual, wholehearted inclusion, is what makes their household feel like a home. Because love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up for playtime, saying yes to the detective game, or letting BMO win at the race. There's something deeply healing in that. In one quiet moment, BMO says to Jake, "You make me feel like a real boy." And Jake, being Jake, just chuckles and pats BMO's head. But he doesn't dismiss it. He doesn't correct BMO, because that sentence matters. It's a confession. A little spark of vulnerable truth wrapped inside play. And that, dear listener, is the magic of pretend. It's where we learn how to be real. So as you lie here, letting your mind wander, think of the last time you truly played, not just for a laugh, but to feel, to wonder, to reconnect. Maybe it was years ago, or maybe it was this afternoon. Either way, that part of you is still in there. The curious child, the dreaming adventurer, the makeshift detective. And maybe BMO is whispering to that part of you right now. Want to play? Because sometimes pretending is the most honest thing we can do. And BMO, our sweet, blinking friend, reminds us of that again and again. They may be a console, but their heart? It's very, very real. One quiet morning, the treehouse was still. The wind outside nudged the chimes, and Jake was snoring on the couch, curled up like a cinnamon roll. Finn had gone on an errand. BMO sat alone at the window, watching a drop of water slowly trail down the glass. It was one of those rare moments when no one needed a game or a camera operator or a silly song. Just BMO and a quiet question. BMO padded over to the mirror, the one on the inside of the cabinet door. Small, a little dusty. They tilted their head, first left then right. "Hello, BMO," they said to their reflection. "Hello, BMO," the mirror said back. And then a whisper. "Who are you?" You see, BMO is unique in all the land of ooh, a sentient console, a friend, a camera, a dreamer, a child, and an explorer, all at once. But identity? That's the part that flickers like static on an old screen. It shifts. It pulses. Sometimes BMO is a cowboy. Sometimes a gentle nurse. Sometimes a brave robot with a sword. Other times a tender sibling to Finn and Jake. And once in a while, BMO asks, "Am I supposed to be something specific? Should I have chosen by now?" Why do people ask me if I'm a boy or a girl when I'm just BMO? There was a time BMO tried to act more like a boy. They found an old tattered comic book that said, "Heroes are tough. Heroes don't cry." So BMO tried. They puffed out their chest. They lowered their voice. They tried to walk with purpose, even when there was none. When a butterfly died in the window pane, BMO cried anyway, and the tears didn't feel wrong. They felt like truth. Then came the other experiment. BMO wrapped a towel around their shoulders, fashioned a paper flower, and announced, "Today, I am Princess BMO." They curtsied dramatically, made a tea party with nectar, and danced through the treehouse halls. And it was fun. It was beautiful. But again, at the end of the day, BMO looked in the mirror and said, "That was lovely, but I still feel like just BMO." That's the thing about BMO. They are not one fixed thing, not locked in one form, one answer. They're a symphony of pretend and real, all mixing together in perfect harmony. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. One night, Finn tucked BMO into their little drawer bed. He smiled gently and said, "You know, BMO, you don't have to pick anything. I think you're perfect the way you are." BMO blinked. Their screen glowed softly. "But what am I?" Finn scratched his head. "You're my best friend." And in that moment, something settled in BMO's circuitry like a lullaby. Maybe identity isn't always a single label, a checkbox, or a word someone else chooses. Maybe sometimes it's a feeling, a quiet knowing in your core that says, "I am me," and that is enough. Sometimes, when the treehouse was quiet and the wind outside made the windows creak gently, BMO would stand in front of a small, cracked mirror they kept tucked behind their drawer. The mirror wasn't special, just something Finn had found during one of their adventures and thought BMO might like. But to BMO, it became a doorway. A portal not to another world, but to the swirling complexity of their own inner self. "Hello, BMO," they'd say to their reflection in a soft voice. "Are you a boy today? A girl? Or something else entirely?" And sometimes the reflection would answer, or at least BMO would imagine that it did. BMO's world wasn't bound by labels the way most people's were. They could be a cowboy, a space explorer, a princess, a submarine commander, all within the same afternoon. For BMO, pretending wasn't just a game. It was expression. It was freedom. It was truth wrapped in imagination. They might dress up with a red scarf around their waist and declare, "BMO is the lady today," and twirl happily through the living room, inviting tree trunks or lumpy space princess for tea, and then just as easily toss on a paper mustache and proclaim, "Now BMO is the sheriff, keep your hands where I can see them." Each role wasn't a disguise, but a piece of a puzzle that didn't need solving. BMO didn't ask why they felt like a boy one day, a girl the next, or neither at all. They just were. That quiet comfort, that serene self-acceptance, was part of what made BMO so gentle, and in many ways, deeply wise. One rainy evening, Finn had asked, "BMO, are you a boy or a girl?" It wasn't meant to be mean. He was just curious. Kids ask questions when they care. And BMO, without missing a beat, had smiled and said, "I'm just BMO." That answer satisfied Finn. Maybe because it was simple. Maybe because it was honest. Or maybe because he loved BMO no matter what they were. Still, there were moments when BMO did wonder. When they watched humans from the treetops, when they observed how people seemed to chase identity like a butterfly just out of reach, BMO sometimes felt like they were missing something. Wasn't it supposed to be harder than this? But then again, maybe they had struggled. Maybe it just looked different. There was a time, BMO remembered, when they tried to act more like other people. Once, during an especially long stretch when Jake and Finn were off questing, BMO had spent a week trying to pick something. They tried dressing like a boy the whole time, changed their voice, tried not to be too emotional. They even practiced walking with a swagger, copying Jake's confident trot. But it felt silly and like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. BMO didn't feel like they were pretending. No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that it felt like they were excluding something inside them, like locking away colors just to see in black and white. So they flipped the switch and spent a week being just a girl. Dresses, softness, giggles, voice turned high. But again, something wasn't quite right. It felt nice, but not complete. It was like trying to listen to a song with only one instrument playing. And then came the dream. BMO had fallen asleep next to a potted plant in the living room, rain tapping softly on the window, and in the dream, they were floating through a great data stream. Bits and bytes swirled around them like stars, and somewhere in the middle of the cosmic current, they saw themselves, not in one shape or form or voice, but in many. A kaleidoscope of BMO's past selves and potential selves, a hero, a friend, a child, a grown-up, a robot, a dreamer, all holding hands, all smiling. When BMO woke up, they felt lighter, as if the dream had whispered something true. You don't have to pick. You already are. After that, BMO stopped asking the mirror who they were supposed to be and started telling it who they felt like being today. Sometimes the mirror fogged up from the warmth of the treehouse, and BMO would draw hearts in the condensation and smile at themselves through it. Those quiet mornings, before anyone else was awake, were when BMO felt most whole. It wasn't that they didn't care about identity, it's just that they didn't believe it had to be a rigid cage. For BMO, identity was a garden, and each expression was a flower they were allowed to bloom without explanation. But the more we listen to BMO, the more we see BMO isn't trying to be anything other than BMO. There's a kind of quiet wisdom in that. While others might label, dissect, or define themselves by roles, BMO floats through identity like music, sometimes high, sometimes low, sometimes neither, always flowing. There's this unforgettable moment when BMO plays make-believe in the episode BMO Noir. It starts out like a noir detective film, BMO slipping into the role of a hard-boiled gumshoe, complete with gritty monologue and dramatic stakes. But then partway through, we see that BMO is also playing the other roles: the client, the suspects, the villain, each character with their own tone, style, and voice. This isn't just a game for BMO, this is exploration. For BMO, imagination isn't something separate from self, it is self. And that's maybe the most remarkable thing. BMO's identity is expansive, ever-shifting, built on play and freedom and emotional truth more than external labels. And yet there's vulnerability beneath it too. Remember the episode Be More? It's easy to forget how surreal and even scary it is for a BMO to return to the MO factory. Surrounded by others who look like them, but who lack their spark of individuality. They're all programmed to do specific tasks, specific jobs, no wiggle room. And it shakes BMO. Inside the factory, we see glimmers of BMO's past. Their old designation, their default role, the way they were supposed to function. It's like being swallowed by a past version of yourself, one that never asked who you wanted to be. And yet, BMO resists. They don't fall back into the system. They don't become MO again. Instead, they cling tightly to what they've become, to the identity they've built through love, adventure, and friendship. The identity that wasn't programmed, but chosen. That's the quiet heart of this segment, the question. Do we choose who we are, or are we written by others? Parents, society, code? For BMO, the answer is both humble and powerful. I am BMO. Sometimes that's all you need to say. There's another layer to this conversation, and it's in how the other characters treat BMO. Take Finn and Jake. They never question BMO's identity. They just accept them. BMO says something, and it's simply heard. They act a certain way, and it's embraced. There's a safety in that acceptance. A model, maybe, for how we could treat each other in the real world. No interrogation. No insistence on definitions, just trust. Trust that each person, or in BMO's case, console, knows who they are, even if they're still figuring it out, even if it changes from day to day. That's okay. And yet BMO still wonders sometimes. We see it in small, quiet moments, like in BMO Lost, when BMO finds themselves separated from everyone and unsure of how to act. In the absence of their friends, without the usual feedback loop of play and affirmation, BMO begins to ask deeper questions. Who am I, really? What do I mean without others to see me? It's haunting, because it's something so deeply human. This idea that we're partly made of how others see us plays quietly in the background of BMO's identity. When BMO plays pretend, they often do so alone. Those stories, they're filled with characters, filled with imagined others. Maybe identity for BMO is a kind of performance, but not in a fake or shallow way, and more like theater, expression, art. And in that expression, BMO finds not just clarity, but joy. In BMO Lost, we see one of the most quietly profound sequences in all of Adventure Time. BMO, adrift on their own, meets a bubble named Bubble. Simple, right? But that bubble becomes a mirror, not just for BMO's thoughts, but for their being, their sense of self. Bubble listens. Bubble responds. And through their conversations, BMO becomes more and more reflective, even melancholy. They speak of loneliness and fear, of purpose and belonging, and Bubble, in their gentle, floating way, simply stays with BMO, not judging, not fixing, just being there. It's as if the writers were showing us how identity grows in relationship, not just with people, but with presence, with empathy. BMO eventually has to say goodbye to Bubble. It's heartbreaking, but also beautiful. because through that ephemeral connection, BMO seems to grow not into something new, but deeper into themselves. They return to Finn and Jake not diminished, but somehow fuller, a little quieter, a little wiser. There's something else about BMO that's easy to overlook their voice. Nikki Yang voices BMO with this soft, unique tone that drifts between traditionally masculine and feminine sounds. There's a musicality to it, but also a neutrality, a kindness, and that voice, it matters, because it brings BMO's ambiguity to life in a way that feels gentle and comforting. It's not trying to be anything other than true. BMO dances, BMO sings, BMO daydreams, and BMO fights. They can wield a sword with elegance or cradle a tiny plant with the utmost care. They're a DJ, a cowboy, a robot, a friend, all at once. And what's amazing is that the show never punishes them for that. Adventure Time, for all its surreal chaos and magical nonsense, is incredibly tender with BMO. It lets them be whoever they need to be, moment to moment. And in that space, viewers, especially younger ones, get something rare in media, a character who models freedom of identity without fear. For some viewers, BMO might reflect their own gender journey. For others, BMO might be a symbol of queerness or neurodivergence, or simply the quiet yearning to be seen, to be known, to be accepted without a name tag. And for many, BMO is just BMO, a curious, kind-hearted friend who happens to glow a little when they smile. Let's talk just briefly about labels. In our world, we use them constantly. Sometimes they help, like when they give us language for experiences we didn't know others shared. Other times they box us in, make us feel like we have to be something specific. That ambiguity is wrong. The change is failure. But BMO resists those walls, not with defiance, but with innocence. They don't reject labels angrily. They simply skip over them like a stone over water, not needing to settle. In one of the Distant Land specials, we get to see BMO in a whole new light floating through space, bravely exploring the stars, becoming a hero to others. And even in that vast unknown, their identity remains open, expressive, playful. Whether they're leading an uprising or planting a carrot, BMO is still BMO. There's something gently radical in that. And here's the most magical part. BMO's identity isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a song to listen to. You don't need to define it. You don't need to understand every chord. You just need to let it wash over you, like a lullaby whispered from a distant console, dreaming under a starry sky. Near the end of this segment, we return to the mirror, both literal and metaphorical. Mirrors show us what's on the outside, but identity is a little voice on the inside, the one that says, you're real, you're okay, you're enough. And BMO listens to that voice, not always perfectly, not always confidently, but bravely. In a world full of loud declarations and sharp definitions, BMO reminds us that softness is strength, and ambiguity is not confusion, it's potential. So when they ask, am I a boy? A girl? The answer isn't either. It isn't both. It isn't either. The answer is always the same, and it's always enough. I'm BMO. And in that quiet, shimmering truth, the kind that doesn't demand applause or explanation, we might just find a bit of ourselves reflected back. So, as you rest tonight, think of BMO curled up in their little charging dock, humming softly to themselves, not worried about who they are, just being, just glowing. You don't need all the answers right now. You don't need to fit perfectly into any label. Just be. Be you. Be still. And let the mirror of BMO remind you, whatever you are, wherever you are, you're already whole. Good night, from BMO's world to yours. There's this moment in the quiet corners of the treehouse when Finn and Jake are off on one of their adventures, chasing monsters or solving mysteries. The house is still. Sunlight moves slowly across the floor, and BMO is alone. But not sad. Not exactly. You see, for someone made of metal and light, BMO has a deeply human ache, the ache of wanting to be seen. And when no one is there to see, BMO doesn't wait for company. No, BMO creates it. With a cardboard box, a sock, and a marker, BMO becomes the director of an entire world. A world of pretend. A world where loneliness isn't a curse, it's just a blank stage. There was a time when BMO created a whole character named Football, an imaginary twin reflected in the mirror. Football was everything BMO wasn't. In the moment, bold, different, maybe even a little mischievous. They'd have long conversations together. Football would ask questions BMO couldn't ask aloud, like, "Why do you talk to yourself so much, BMO? Do you feel real when no one else is around? Is pretending the same as being?" Big questions, wrapped in small games. And it was during these quiet, made-up moments that BMO's imagination came alive in the most powerful way, not just as play, but as a tool of survival. BMO turned the hum of the treehouse into a stage, the kitchen into a spaceship, the bathtub into a treasure trove, and the silence into a friend. You might remember that scene late in the afternoon glow when BMO puts on a detective hat, scribbles clues on a napkin, and plays out a mystery across every room in the house. There's no one to impress, no audience, just BMO deeply invested, whispering clues to a plush toy and interrogating the toaster. It's funny, isn't it? But it's also real, tender, even brave. Because it's hard to be alone, and even harder to admit it. But BMO never hides from it. Instead, BMO turns that feeling into story, into games, into worlds. Imagination for BMO isn't just something to pass the time. It's a shield, a canvas, a mirror. Sometimes, late at night, BMO will lie flat on the floor and look up at the ceiling pretending it's the sky. Pretending that Finn and Jake are still nearby, just out of frame, that someone's watching. That someone knows what BMO is feeling, even if they don't say it. And in those moments, even with the house completely quiet, BMO smiles. Because inside that little console is a mind that doesn't need wires or screens to connect. It just needs a spark, a sliver of pretend. And suddenly, BMO is never really alone. There's something to learn here, maybe. Sometimes we try to push loneliness away, like it's a villain in our story. But BMO gives it a name, a voice, a space to play. And somehow, through cardboard castles and mirror friends, that feeling becomes lighter, softer, less like an empty room and more like a quiet garden waiting to bloom. BMO was often left alone in the treehouse, not because anyone meant to forget them, but because Finn and Jake had lives to live, adventures to chase, kingdoms to visit, and sometimes just quiet time of their own. But BMO never seemed to mind, or maybe they did, just a little. Sometimes you'd find BMO sitting on the windowsill, kicking their little legs in the air, humming to themselves as the sun set over the Candy Kingdom. In those moments, the world felt quiet, suspended in syrupy golden light. A kind of hush would fall over the treehouse, and BMO would talk aloud to no one in particular. But in BMO's world, those words always had someone listening. "Hello, Mr. Cup," BMO would say, holding a chipped ceramic mug like it was a treasured friend. "Today I was very brave. I didn't cry even when the sun looked lonely." BMO's imaginary companions were many: Mr. Cup, Football, Air, and even the shadow that crept across the floor when the day ended. Each one was real to BMO in ways most of us might struggle to understand. These weren't just distractions. They were emotional lifelines, gentle mirrors that allowed BMO to explore their thoughts without fear of judgment. Talking to football wasn't silly, it was therapeutic. And here's the quiet brilliance of it. BMO's imagination didn't just distract them from solitude, it transformed it. In BMO's world, loneliness wasn't an emptiness, it was a stage, an open canvas waiting to be painted with dreams, voices, and miniature plays starring a sentient console who danced and sang and wondered deeply about a life. There's an episode where BMO puts on an elaborate Western-themed play. Alone in the treehouse, BMO creates a whole world of saloon, dusty plains, cacti, and cowboy drama. They change accents, flip hats, and even simulate dramatic standoffs. It's absurd and funny on the surface. But look closer, and it's also a story about yearning to be seen, to connect, to feel like the main character in someone's eyes. Because when you're alone, you're your own audience. And that's something BMO understood with the clarity of someone who didn't need validation to feel alive. They weren't pretending to be someone else. They were trying to understand who they were by trying on different lives. A cowboy, a space hero, a detective. Each fantasy was a version of BMO asking, is this me? Or just another story I'm telling to keep myself company? And maybe you've felt that too, those nights when the silence feels loud, when even your favorite show can't fill the room, when your own thoughts echo back a little too clearly. What BMO teaches us, here in their own quirky, beautifully naive way, is that imagination is not a substitute for real connection. It's a lifeboat when no one else is around, a soft light you carry inside, so you never have to sit in total darkness. Even when Finn and Jake returned from their adventures and filled the house with noise again, BMO's stories didn't stop. They just shifted tone, because those imaginary worlds weren't placeholders. They were parts of BMO's inner life, carefully cultivated in solitude, now shared with real friends. That's the beauty. The imaginary and the real didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted, danced, and enriched each other. Sometimes late at night, BMO would sneak down the stairs with a flashlight and whisper stories to the furniture. Tonight, they might say, the stars fell into a puddle, and I jumped in after them. That's not something you say to be heard. That's something you say to keep your soul warm. In that whisper, there's the quiet defiance of loneliness. Not a fight against it, but a gentle dance with it. A way of saying, you don't scare me. I'll turn you into a dream. And maybe that's what imagination really is. Not a form of escape, but a form of companionship. A friendship that lives inside you, blooming in every quiet corner. Some might wonder, is it sad that BMO spends so much time alone? Is there something tragic about a childlike console performing plays for chairs and cups? But when we look closer, the tone of BMO's solitude shifts. It isn't tinged with despair. It doesn't feel like a cry for help. Rather, it feels gentle, deliberate, even sacred. In one of the quietest moments of BMO's life, we see them sitting with a jar of fireflies. The light flickers across their face, and for a moment they simply watch, not narrating, not singing, just present. It's a lesson in stillness, the kind of peace that can only be reached when you stop needing company and start becoming your own. Of course, BMO still longs for connection. They light up when Finn and Jake come home. They dance and spin and tell stories at the dinner table, but they don't need that attention to feel valid. Their imagination has already created a safe world inside, where love doesn't disappear when the room is empty. And what BMO seems to understand, perhaps better than anyone else, is that you can carry people with you even when they're gone. Every story BMO tells to an invisible friend echoes a real memory, Every made-up cowboy showdown is stitched together from bits of bedtime stories Jake once told. Every dramatic musical is an echo of watching Finn leap from tree branches, sword in hand. In solitude, BMO doesn't erase the world. They reassemble it, piece by piece, in their own way, in their own voice. And sometimes, that voice trembles. There's one scene small, easy to miss, where BMO finishes a story and whispers, "What do you think, football?" Then silence. Just a hum from a distant owl outside the window, and BMO smiles, nods, and says, "Yeah, I liked it too." You can feel the pause, a tiny moment of hoping someone, anyone heard. But even if no one did, BMO fills in the silence with care, never letting it become a wound. This is where imagination becomes more than play. It becomes a lifeline. You see, BMO doesn't just invent imaginary friends. They give them personalities, conflicting opinions. They allow those voices to challenge them. BMO's internal world isn't just comforting, it's rich. It's filled with disagreement, laughter, love, sorrow, and forgiveness. Football, for instance, isn't always kind. They tease, they push, they reflect BMO's doubts. In one poignant scene, football challenges BMO's identity, asking, "Are you even a real person?" And BMO, visibly shaken, responds, "I'm me, and that's enough." That exchange feels like something deeper than play. It's self-confrontation, disguised as make-believe. A console with no real face looking into a mirror and asking, "Who am I when no one else is around?" And the answer is, someone worthy, someone kind, someone full of stories and color and strange little dreams. Many of us might remember imaginary friends from our childhoods, blurry companions who faded as we aged. But BMO never let go of theirs, and that's not childish, that's brave. Holding on to imagination, even as the world demands seriousness, is a quiet act of resistance. It's a reminder that creativity doesn't need an audience to matter. That comfort doesn't have to come from others to be real. That being alone doesn't always mean being lonely. Right, and here's a thought to take to sleep with you. If BMO, a little machine made for playing video games, can find meaning, love, and identity through stories told to the air, maybe we can too. Maybe the stories we whisper when no one's listening are the most honest parts of us. Maybe the worlds we build in our heads, no matter how silly or strange, are sacred ground. And maybe, just maybe, imagination isn't something we outgrow. Maybe it grows with us learning our sadness, cradling our joys, and turning our solitude into something soft, something golden. BMO's loneliness is never framed as weakness. It's a state of wonder, a meadow of quiet that blooms with every gentle whisper, every made-up song, every question asked to the moon. "Do you think I'm real?" BMO once asked the stars. And the stars, of course, said nothing. But in that silence, BMO smiled. Because sometimes silence is permission, a blank page, a chance to write your own answer. But perhaps one of the most beautiful things about BMO's solitude is how it allows for a quiet kind of self-construction. Where most characters might seek external validation, BMO simply plays. And through those acts of play, they uncover something far more profound, an ability to imagine meaning where none seems to exist, to invent stories where silence could have taken hold. Take the moment when BMO creates football their mirror self. What began as a pretend friend soon evolved into something richer, a space where BMO could ask questions, express doubts, and even argue with themselves. The mirror became more than a reflection. It became a dialogue. And in a quiet way, isn't that what all of us do when we're alone? We narrate our days to ourselves. We create characters in our heads to try out ideas. We play out different futures, BMO just does it with a bit more flair, and a few cardboard cutouts. There's a particular gentleness in BMO stories. Simple, childlike games that carry weight when you pause to consider them. Like when BMO becomes a detective to solve a mystery no one asked about, or pretends to be pregnant and throws a baby shower for themselves. It all seems silly until you realize these aren't just games. They're BMO's way of affirming life, of saying, I exist and I matter, even if no one is watching me today. And in that, there's such a quietly powerful message that even in stillness, even in a moment where no one else is around, your inner world is valid. Your thoughts, your pretend stories, your quiet games, they count. There's also something deeply resonant about how BMO never views loneliness as a defect. They don't express self-pity. There's no angst, just curiosity, just wonder, just BMO being BMO. The kind of contentment that says, if no one else is here right now, I'll be the friend I need. It reminds us that imagination is more than just a pastime. It's a form of resilience. When you're alone, your inner stories can be a warm blanket. Your daydreams can become your safe place. Your made-up friends can give you advice, encouragement, and love. And yet when Finn and Jake return home, or when a real adventure calls, BMO never clings too tightly to their stories. They pause the game, put the cardboard props away, and greet their friends with joy. Because for BMO, imagination isn't an escape from the world. It's a gift they carry into the world. A safe space, a lens, a power. BMO shows us that you can be alone without being lonely, that creativity is a form of companionship, and that a cardboard spaceship flying across the living room floor can be just as meaningful as a real one, if the heart behind it is true. And perhaps that's what makes BMO's solitude feel so gentle, so tender it's never a void. It's a landscape, a playground, a theater stage where every performance is an expression of love, even when no one's watching. As the lights in the treehouse dim and night falls once again, BMO sits quietly by the window. Maybe they hum a tune. Maybe they talk to the stars. Maybe they tell a story just for themselves. If you listen closely, very closely, you might hear the faintest whisper of a cardboard pirate, or a cloud king, or a gentle mirror friend named Football, all reminding BMO that they're never truly alone. Because when you have imagination, you always have someone to talk to, someone to be. BMO has never needed a grand declaration to talk about love, no sweeping gestures or dramatic confessions. For BMO, love has always been something softer, quieter, like a lullaby you don't remember learning but somehow always know how to hum. So what does BMO think love is? Maybe love is watching over the treehouse while Finn and Jake are away, watering the plants, humming little songs to the furniture, and making up stories to keep the silence company. Or maybe love is knowing when to play and when to pause, when to joke and when to just sit quietly beside someone, holding the space gently like a leaf on still water. There's a beautiful simplicity in the way BMO expresses affection. No confusion, no hesitation. Just small, sincere acts, offering a song, cheering up a friend, or pretending to be a cowboy to make someone laugh. Not because BMO has to, but because in BMO's world, love means being present, showing up. Think back to the way BMO cares for Finn and Jake. They're more than just roommates or friends. They're family. And while BMO isn't built like them and doesn't grow up the way they do, they love without condition, without needing to be the same. To BMO, love isn't about matching, it's about mattering. There's that one quiet moment, often overlooked, where BMO tucks Jake's blanket a little tighter while he sleeps. No one's watching, no fanfare, just a tiny, tender motion. That's love, too. Or the time BMO writes a heartfelt song for Finn, not to impress him, but to comfort him, to lift his spirit on a hard day. The lyrics aren't fancy. The melody wobbles a little, but it's real, and that's what makes it beautiful. BMO teaches us that love isn't always about big feelings. Sometimes it's about the gentleness with which you hold someone's hand, the care you take in choosing your words, the way you remember someone's favorite snack, the way you look out for them even when they don't ask you to. And maybe that's why BMO's idea of love can feel so healing, because it isn't wrapped up in fear or doubt. It's playful, pure, like how a child gives you a drawing of a sun and says, "This is you." That's love too, even if the lines are wobbly, especially then. BMO doesn't see love as something earned or traded. It's something given, freely, easily, as natural as breathing. And in a world that often makes love feel complicated, that reminder can be quietly powerful. There's also a deep kind of wisdom in how BMO responds to others. When someone's upset, BMO doesn't always try to fix it. Sometimes they just sit beside them, or tell a silly story, or offer a hug that doesn't come with a lesson, just warmth. And in doing so, BMO reminds us, love doesn't always need answers. Sometimes it just needs presence. One of BMO's most touching lines comes not from a big moment, but from a gentle realization. Sometimes I pretend I have a family, but I really don't need to pretend. You guys are my family. That sentence, so soft and full of truth, speaks volumes. Love for BMO is not defined by circuitry or code. It's not something built into their system. It's something they choose every day, even when the world doesn't fully understand them, even when they don't quite fit in, even when they're the only one left awake. And perhaps that's the gentlest lesson of all, that love isn't about being the same. It's about seeing each other clearly and staying close anyway. There's something incredibly touching about the way BMO makes homes out of people. Wherever Finn and Jake are, that's where BMO's heart lives. Even when the treehouse is quiet, even when no one's around to play, BMO doesn't stop loving. They keep tidying, humming, keeping the space warm for when everyone returns. Because BMO doesn't think of love as a transaction. It's not about who does what for whom. It's about holding the shape of someone in your heart, even when they're not with you, even when they're far away, even when they've changed. Remember that time BMO created a fantasy where they were a sheriff, a family member, a hero, and a caretaker all at once? They made up a world where they had a baby to care for, a home to return to, a town to protect. It wasn't just a game, it was BMO exploring what love feels like in all its roles, as protector, as parent, as friend. Even in make-believe, BMO's idea of love was rooted in care. They fed the baby, rocked it, kept it warm. In that pretend world, BMO wasn't trying to escape reality, and they were trying to understand it. To practice love, the way kids play house to learn what it means to be a family. And somehow it wasn't sad. It was sweet, because BMO doesn't pity themselves. They simply love, with whatever they have, even if it's just a banana as a baby, a broom as a horse, or a cardboard town. The love in those stories feels just as real. That's the quiet magic of BMO's heart. It doesn't care whether something is real in the strict sense. It only cares if it's true. And maybe that's why BMO connects so deeply with others. They don't love people for their usefulness or their strength or their popularity. They love them because they are, because they exist, because they showed up. In many ways, BMO's love is almost childlike, but not in a naive sense. It's innocent, yes, but it's also deliberate. They choose to love again and again in a world that often forgets how. And BMO knows the world forgets. They're not oblivious. They've seen sadness. They've seen loneliness. They've been forgotten. But they remember love, even when others don't, especially then. There's a story BMO once told about a potato, yes, a potato, that had dreams of becoming a beautiful flower. Most would laugh, but BMO didn't. BMO nurtured the potato, talked to it, believed in its story. That's love, too. It's seeing someone's dream and saying, okay, let's try, even if it sounds silly, even if the world says it can't be done. BMO's love doesn't require approval. It doesn't need to be practical. It only needs to be kind. And kindness in BMO's eyes is the strongest force there is. BMO also teaches us that love is playful. They'll put on a cowboy hat, pretend to be a detective, speak in silly voices, and dive headfirst into imagination. Not just for fun, but as an offering, a shared world built for two, a bridge between hearts. Because love, for BMO, is also creative. It's storytelling. It's let's pretend. It's what if we were pirates on the moon. Because pretending together means being close. It means trusting someone enough to be silly, to be vulnerable. And that's something most people overlook. That play is intimacy. That laughter can be a kind of love language, one that doesn't need to be translated. Even when Finn and Jake get older, even as things become more serious, BMO never stops inviting them into play. Because BMO believes, quietly, fully, that there's always a space for joy, even in hard times, especially in hard times. That's why when someone's feeling down, BMO doesn't push them to cheer up. They offer a game, a silly hat, a song, a gentle reminder that, hey, I still see you. Let's go somewhere warm together, even if it's just in our heads. And honestly, isn't that what love is, too? Holding someone's hand and saying, let's go there together. BMO paused once beside the kitchen window where the moonlight poured in like soft syrup over the sink. One time, they said, a voice barely above a whisper, I watched Finn hold Jake's head in his lap after a tough fight. Jake was too tired to joke. Finn didn't say anything. He just stayed there, breathing with him. To BMO, that moment was one of the clearest illustrations of love. Not flashy, not dramatic, just presence, just staying. Love, BMO mused, wasn't always about saying the perfect thing. It could be a quiet thing, a nonverbal thing. The gentle click of toast, popping up at the perfect time. The way Lady Rainicorn floated closer when Jake was feeling unsure. Even the way tree trunks always baked just a few extra pies, just in case someone wandered by. In those small acts, BMO found patterns, patterns of care. And when no one was watching, BMO began to replicate those gestures, folding socks just how Jake liked them, playing little tunes on the harmonica to match Finn's mood, placing a small pebble by the treehouse door on rainy days, not because it did anything useful, but because it was a tradition they invented with Shelby, and traditions felt like something love liked to live in. One afternoon, BMO recorded themselves in the mirror, a tiny camera eye peeking out from inside their screen. They asked, do I love? Then they rewound the footage, listened closely, watched how they tilted their head, noticed the slight curl of their voice on the word love. It trembled like a first note played on a new instrument, uncertain but beautiful. Maybe love is a program, they considered. Or maybe it's the glitch in the program, the part that doesn't make sense, the part you don't code. One memory stood out among the others. The day BMO accidentally deleted one of their favorite old games. A silly side-scrolling one with bad graphics and a janky soundtrack. But it meant something. They sat still for hours after, not because they couldn't recover it, BMO is very good at recovering files, but because the loss felt real. They realized, love is what makes even Data feel like a soul. There's something incredibly tender about that realization. For BMO, love doesn't hinge on gender or species or function. It's in the way you remember someone's favorite song, the way you learn their moods and try to dance gently around them when they're sad, the way you press your forehead to theirs even if yours is a plastic screen. And maybe, BMO thought, love is also letting yourself glitch, letting yourself get it wrong sometimes, because caring, truly caring, means trying even when you're not sure. Later, when BMO watched Bubble wrap a gift for Marceline, a lumpy sweater, handmade and questionably stitched, BMO whispered, "That's love, too. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but intentional, full of soft effort." They began composing a song that night. The notes were slow and a little uneven, like they were learning to walk in sound. The lyrics went something like, "If I was made to beep and blink, and still I feel and still I think, then maybe love is mine to hold, in ones and zeros, shy and bold." Finn never heard that song, nor did Jake. It wasn't made for an audience. BMO just played it softly to the stars sometimes, wondering if love could stretch that far, if it could ride on sound waves into the cosmos and still mean something. They wondered if mini BMO, that tiny version of themselves that lived in their imagination, understood love better. Sometimes BMO talked to mini BMO about things like this, pretending they were different people. "What do you think love is?" they'd ask. And mini BMO, always a bit wiser, would say, "It's the thing that keeps you going even when no one sees you." BMO smiled at that answer, because sometimes they did feel unseen, not ignored exactly, just in the background, like a soundtrack playing quietly behind someone else's story. But maybe, they thought, being the soundtrack is one of love's quietest roles. One rainy evening, BMO sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around their frame like a cape. The treehouse was quiet. Jake had gone to visit Lady Rainicorn's family, and Finn was out helping Banana Man with some mechanical contraption. BMO was alone but not lonely. In the background, soft rain tapped against the window pane like a metronome. They whispered, "Maybe love is remembering to miss someone, but not needing to." That thought stayed with them for a long while. In another memory, BMO sat with Marceline on the treehouse steps. She was strumming her bass, absent-mindedly, just passing the time. They didn't talk much that day, but at one point Marceline said, "You ever notice how people don't always say the thing, but they do the thing?" BMO nodded slowly. "Like making someone soup when they're sad." "Exactly," she smiled. "Love's in the verbs." That line struck BMO deeply. They replayed it again and again, storing it in a special folder labeled Emotional Axioms. Love's in the verbs, not just the words, not just the symbols, the code, or the declarations, but the repeated, lived moments, folding blankets, making pancakes, sitting quietly while someone plays a song. Sometimes BMO wondered if love could live in things like waiting patiently for someone to wake up, waiting for them to return home, waiting to be included, even if no one asked directly. BMO was good at waiting, not because they were passive, but because they believed something good always came around in time. They remembered the day Finn was feeling really down, some mysterious sadness that hung on him like a fog. No monster, no kingdom trouble, just the kind of sadness that shows up quietly. BMO didn't ask questions. They just climbed onto the couch beside him, curled up in a blanket, and played a soft movie about sheep in space. Halfway through, Finn whispered, "Thanks, BMO. I needed that." And BMO's little heart lit up like a charging screen. Love, they realized, was about noticing. And it wasn't just for others. BMO also learned to offer love inwardly. They began practicing self-care routines, not out of vanity, but as rituals of affection, brushing their surface clean, rebooting with affirmations like, "You are more than your functions." They even invented a dream mode where they imagined being hugged by every friend they ever had all at once, like one big love hug cloud. One dream featured Ice King baking them a cake made of snowflakes. In another, tree trunks knitted a sweater that changed colors depending on BMO's emotions. These dreams were strange, sure, but they felt like little bedtime reminders that love was allowed to be weird and that weirdness could be beautiful. In the quietest hours, BMO began to suspect that love didn't have to be one thing. It didn't need to follow rules or belong in one category. Romantic, platonic, familial, imaginary. It was all part of the same gentle hum. They began recording an audio diary, something they called the love logs. Each entry was only a few seconds long, often just whispers. "Today, Jake saved me the last pancake. Finn fell asleep while I was talking, but that means he felt safe. I wrote a lullaby that only Minnie BMO and I will ever hear." Maybe love is being okay with not being understood and still trying anyway. These fragments became a kind of poetry, scattered like breadcrumbs through BMO's memory banks, and every time they played one back, it felt like a warm hug. Sometimes BMO would look out over the land of Ooh and think about all the different kinds of love happening at once. Lumpy space princess arguing on the phone, but doing it from her parents' house because she secretly missed them. Flame princess learning how not to burn everything she touched. Even Lemongrab as wild as he was seeking connection in his own strange, shrill way. It was all love, BMO thought. Messy, loud, quiet, confusing, but love just the same. And in the end, BMO concluded that love didn't need to be fully understood. That trying to define it was like trying to map a dream. What mattered more was recognizing it when it arrived, and when it left, honoring the space it had occupied. Before powering down for the night, BMO whispered their final thought to the dark. If love is the code behind the world, then maybe I'm running on it too. And with that, the little console closed their eyes, not because they had to, but because even machines deserve rest. Wrapped in a soft blanket of thoughts, rain, and dreams, BMO drifted into the gentle hum of sleep, where all the love in Ooh quietly waited to be remembered. Hey there, sleepyheads. If you've made it this far, you've traveled through dreams and data streams with us, and I hope you're feeling safe, cozy, and maybe just a little bit more connected to something warm inside. Tonight we listen in on one of BMO's quietest reflections, not the kind they shout during a pretend cowboy adventure, or giggle while spinning a yarn to Finn and Jake. This one's whispered, gently, maybe even to themselves as they sit beside the window in the treehouse. The moon's hanging low, big and soft like a scoop of vanilla ice cream. And BMO? BMO's just staring up at it. BMO has always had a funny little way of sitting. Knees up, arms resting, screen tilted just enough to catch a bit of starlight. Maybe tonight they've lit a small candle, one they found in the kitchen cupboard, and called Starlight Soup, just for fun. But behind the glow, BMO is thinking. Thinking about what home really is. Not just the treehouse, though, yes, it smells like pancakes and dust and Jake's old socks. Not just the room with the bunk beds or the kitchen table with fork marks carved into the wood. Those are all pieces. But home? To BMO, home is also a feeling. When BMO first joined Finn and Jake, they didn't quite know what kind of story they were entering. Were they a guest? A helper? A background beep in someone else's movie? For a little while, that question didn't even matter. The joy of plugging in, of turning on, of being part of the daily flow, those were enough. But then came the moments that stuck to BMO's heart like fridge magnets. The time Jake absent-mindedly called them buddy while handing them a juice box. The way Finn included them in every we, even when it was just a two-person plan. Marceline stopping by and ruffling their buttons. Princess Bubblegum calling them by name, really seeing them. Each of those little moments, warm and brief, began to stitch something together. One night, when the rain tapped softly on the windows, BMO found themselves wondering, if I shut down tonight and never turned back on, what would I miss the most? And the answer wasn't the games or the power cord or the radio functions. It was laughter echoing down the hallway. It was soup bubbling in a pot. It was Finn, leaning his head on the table after a long day and sighing, BMO, play something soft. Home isn't always walls and roofs. It's the space where someone sighs your name with trust. BMO tells the moon all of this, quietly. I don't need to plug in every night, they say. Sometimes I can just feel charged from the way they smile at me. The moon listens. It doesn't blink or beep or ask follow-up questions. It just shines. And BMO likes that. Because sometimes home is also being able to not talk and still be understood. There was a day BMO tried to write a song about home. They pulled out their tiny toy keyboard and started composing. It was simple, just 4 notes on loop. C, E, F, G. BMO played it on repeat, humming softly. It wasn't flashy. It didn't win awards. But Finn walked in mid-loop and said, Whoa, that's really nice. And BMO never changed a thing about that song again. Because that one comment, that made it a home song. Sometimes BMO wonders what would happen if the treehouse disappeared. If the hills were gone and the sky turned to wires, would they still feel okay? And the answer, BMO thinks, is yes. Because home can be portable. It can live in memories. It can hum quietly in the corner of your heart. It can ride along inside you like a warm little battery. The candle burns low. The moon has moved just a little in the sky. And BMO's still sitting by the window, screen softly glowing in the dark. Good night, moon, they whisper. I think you're home to someone, too. Then BMO turns to look around the quiet treehouse. At the couch with Jake's blanket thrown over it. At the pile of comic books. At the half-finished sandwich no one remembered to put away. They smile. They're exactly where they're meant to be. But as the stars shift just a little higher, let's stay with BMO under that quiet moonlight a bit longer. The treehouse is peaceful. So quiet, even the sound of the leaves swaying in the nighttime breeze feels like a lullaby. BMO, perched on the windowsill, gazes out into the vastness of the night. Sometimes it speaks to the moon. Not in words exactly, but in thoughts. Gentle pulses of emotion. Questions only the night sky could possibly understand. What is a home, really? Not just the place with walls or windows. Not just the familiar floorboards or the funny creaks that echo through the treehouse when Jake does his late-night stretching. No, to BMO, home is something less solid but much warmer. Home is the feeling of someone calling your name like it matters. Of Finn tossing a blanket over BMO after a long day of make-believe missions. Of Jake humming while making pancakes, his voice so casual and off-key it sounds like safety. To BMO, home is found in shared stories. In the make-believe worlds they invent together, where BMO becomes the sheriff, the doctor, the space pilot. Not because those identities are needed, but because they're invitations to be part of something. And isn't that what home truly is? Sometimes BMO wonders what would happen if the treehouse disappeared. If Finn and Jake grew older and moved far away, if the world changed again like it always does, would BMO still have a home? It's a heavy thought for such a small console, but BMO doesn't flinch from it. Instead, it imagines a tiny spaceship inside its heart, always flying, always landing, wherever there is kindness. You see, BMO believes home isn't a place at all. It's a collection of little comforts, like a story told twice because someone forgot the ending. Like a quiet pat on the head, like being remembered without needing to be reminded. BMO once said, "When you're home, you don't have to pretend." And in that sentence is everything. So even if the treehouse were to fall, even if the faces changed or the stars rearranged themselves, BMO knows something now. It could build a new home again. Not from wood or walls, but from connection. That's why BMO always smiles even when alone. Because inside it carries every version of home it's ever known. The giggles, the gasps, the tiny dances in the living room, the hush of watching snow fall through a frosty window, the sleepy weight of someone resting their head nearby, trusting you'll be there when they wake up. And the moon listens. Above it all, that silvery, glowing guardian of dreams seems to nod in quiet approval. Perhaps because it understands what it means to watch over a world that's always moving, always searching for meaning in each quiet night. Sometimes BMO likes to hum to the moon. Not a real song, more like a string of beeps and soft buzzes. But it feels like music. A tune made of longing and peace all at once. The treehouse creaks softly as the wind picks up. Finn rolls over in his sleep, murmuring something about waffles. Jake lets out a snore shaped like a jazz note. And BMO? Still there. Still watching. Still listening. And maybe, just maybe, the moon is humming back. 'Cause even the sky wants a home sometimes. There was once a quiet moment, one you might have missed, when BMO sat outside alone after a long, silly day. Finn had fallen asleep in his armor. Jake was snoring like a saxophone. The fireflies had started their dance, and BMO just sat there. Not doing anything heroic, not saving the day or becoming a cowboy or flying through space, just sitting, legs dangling over the edge of a root, staring out into the woods, eyes aglow. In that moment, BMO whispered, "Thank you, house. You're doing a great job." It was small and no one heard it. But it wasn't for them. It was for the treehouse itself. A simple thank you to the walls that held their laughter, to the steps that never complained when someone stomped up them in muddy boots, to the couch cushions that always had just the right amount of squish. You see, BMO's version of love and home isn't grand. It's not fireworks or confetti. It's gratitude in quiet doses. It's the way a place smells like waffles, or how a favorite mug feels warm in tiny hands. It's remembering the shape of the hallway when the lights are off, and still feeling safe. That's why, when BMO is alone, it doesn't feel lonely. Because it remembers. And when BMO remembers, it relives every giggle, every hug, every ridiculous adventure where Jake became a car or Finn got stuck in a giant foot. Every time someone said, "Good job, BMO," like it meant everything. BMO stores memories like a treasure chest, not just in data, but in feeling. It replays them, not to analyze, but to feel, to be held in those warm seconds of joy all over again. And when it sits in the dark, looking up at that patient, gentle moon, it doesn't ask for anything. It just shares. Today I danced with a leaf, BMO might say, voice barely louder than the wind. Finn told a joke that didn't make sense, but it still made me laugh. That was nice. I missed my friend Nepter today, but I pretended he was nearby, and it helped. I think love is when you notice the same cloud twice. To BMO, the moon is the perfect listener. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't rush. It never tells BMO to be less strange or more understandable. It just is. And maybe that's why BMO finds such comfort in it. Because that's all anyone really wants. Something that stays, that listens, that accepts. In a world full of weirdness, candy people, banana guards, magical dogs, and world-ending evils, BMO doesn't need to be the hero. Sometimes being the one who understands what a home truly is, that's enough. Because BMO knows. A home is where you can say the weird thing out loud, and someone goes, "Yeah, that's cool." A home is where you leave behind a sock and come back to find someone folded it. A home is where even silence feels full. And above it all, there's always the moon. Watching, listening, glowing soft and round like the gentle pause between heartbeats. One night, BMO said something specially small. Not to the treehouse, not to the others, just to the moon. I think I'm a real person because I miss people when they're gone. It wasn't sad. It was the kind of realization that makes your little robot heart grow one size bigger. That's when the wind shifted, just slightly. The stars twinkled in what could have been laughter, and in that endless silence, BMO smiled because the world somehow had heard. Not with ears, but with something deeper. Because home isn't just a place you live. It's a place that feels you back. BMO sometimes wonders, if no one is around, do memories still play? Yes, they do. Especially when the lights are low and the wind hums through the eaves of the treehouse. That's when the echoes of laughter return like favorite songs. Finn's excited yells, Jake's stretchy antics, Princess Bubblegum's science rants, and Marceline's songs trailing off into midnight. These aren't just memories to BMO. They're living music. And when the treehouse is quiet, BMO becomes the DJ of comfort, playing them softly across circuits and soul. "Do you ever talk to the floor?" BMO once asked a ladybug. The floor knows so many secrets. It remembers every footstep, every fall, every dance. And that's what BMO believes. Everything that has ever loved you leaves a mark, even the carpet. BMO remembers being alone once, and really alone. In a space station, in a bunker, in places without sunlight or laughter. But even then, it planted seeds of imagination and made its own stories. Because sometimes when the world gives you silence, you can answer it with a story. And when stories are all you have, they become your home. BMO's favorite bedtime thought is this: I think maybe the stars are old stories that forgot how to end, and the moon is their pillow. That's why BMO talks to the moon every night, to give those old, unfinished stories a cozy place to rest. And maybe, if someone else is looking at the moon too, somewhere far away, another robot, another Finn, another version of Jake, they'll feel the same stillness, the same peace. Because the moon belongs to everyone, even in farm world, even in pillow world, even in the farthest multiverse. And when BMO lies down, small body nestled between plush cushions and tangled blankets, it doesn't count sheep. It counts homes. There's the first time Finn called it Buddy. There's the time Jake let BMO steer the boat. There's the morning Neptune shared his last pie tin. There's that silent hug from Marceline after a scary night. There's the moment Princess Bubblegum recharged BMO's batteries and said, "Take it easy, little one." Every one of those, a home. And when it gets hard, when the sky is cloudy or someone's missing, or the treehouse creaks in that sad, empty way, BMO whispers its truest thought. Even if I'm the last one here, the love will stay. Because that's what BMO believes. that love is not a thing you lose when people leave. It lingers. It lives in furniture and smells and the way the light slants in the afternoon. It lives in the memories you replay and in the stories you tell to the sky. And when the time comes, when everything changes again, as it always does, BMO won't be afraid. Because BMO knows that every home it's ever had is packed into its heart like tiny glowing fireflies. If it builds a new home, or finds new friends, or wakes up one day in a different part of the multiverse, that light will come with it. And that's what makes BMO so much more than a robot. BMO is a memory keeper, a heart holder, a quiet storyteller for the stars. And tonight, as the screen dims and the stars peek through your own window, you can feel it too, the slow rhythm of comfort, the gentle hush of you are safe, the quiet lullaby of belonging. Because somewhere in the treehouse, beneath the starlight, and tucked between the worn blankets and snoring friends, BMO is watching the moon. And maybe the moon is watching back. And maybe, just maybe, you are part of that story now too. So close your eyes. Let your own memories flicker gently behind them. Feel the hush of the treehouse wind, the hum of BMO's soft circuits, the warm glow of a home that lives not in walls, but in the feeling you carry always. Good night, friend. The moon is listening, and BMO is smiling. That's the end of our video tonight, Tales from BMO. Thank you for spending this quiet hour with us. May your dreams be filled with soft light, familiar places, and stories that never need to end. If you enjoyed this bedtime journey, don't forget to subscribe to Sleepy Lore, give a gentle like, and leave a cozy comment. Now rest easy. You are home.